Welcome to Coffee and Conversations, mini episodes by victims and villains. I'm your host, Captain Nostalgia, and on this episode, I am joined by staff writer Mr. Joshua Howell. Well, fresh off of its Tribeca Film Festival debut, we are talking about the documentary Pray Away from executive producers Ryan Murphy and Jason Blum. All right, Josh, what did you think about this movie? Because I think we are coming at this film from two different walks of life, but I'm curious. You've teased a little bit about it. What did you think of this movie?
I was born and raised in the church. Grew up Baptist my entire life. I memorized the bulk of the Bible through programs like Awana and stuff like that. So the church is very much a part of my upbringing. So when I saw that this movie or this documentary was
recording in progress,
when I saw that this documentary was based on Exodus International, I immediately recognized the name. It's something that I just remember the name floating around the church. It's something that my family has a history with. So I was really interested in this movie, or in this, I keep on saying movie, in this documentary, especially with some big names behind it, producing it. And honestly, without getting into spoilers, I just felt like it kind of scratched the surface, and then held in one spot for the entire runtime, and I was waiting for the third act or the resolve or just, I don't know. I guess I was just waiting for more, and it didn't really reach that point for me.
Did you ever feel like coming into this documentary, like you knew how it was going to end? Because I have a lot of friends that have kind of gone through the whole conversion therapy thing and have never really changed. So like this was like, I knew how this film was going to end kind of coming into it, but I also, too, don't have the background that you do with Exodus. I grew up in a pretty conservative household. I would say that some of my upbringing borderlines really like homophobia. So a lot of that stuff into my adulthood, I had to actually unlearn. This movie is really irritating to me on a number of levels, mostly because like, as a modern day Christian man and an ally for the LGBT community, like it's frustrating to watch from a personal level, but on a cinematic level, I completely agree. Like I feel like this film never reaches its true potential. Like it kind of always shows you what could have been, but like this movie, I feel like probably could have been better suited for a mini series in terms of like Wild Wild Country. Like I think Wild Wild Country is a great example of what Netflix is able to do. But this film, it feels like they took kind of like that Fire Festival documentary route with it, where they presented you this like really wild and crazy story and kind of how it blew up. And because of the legacy of Exodus International, it feels like this movie was the wrong format to tell this story.
Yeah, I agree. I think the pacing really felt like episode one of a mini series. And while I don't think it's something that should stretch out to, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 episodes, it really felt like this was the build-up episode. This was the testimony episode. And whilst all of the testimonies were very intriguing, and I personally felt for each person there, and they reflected testimonies of people that I know and maybe someone that we might bring on for the spoiler talk later. But I just felt like, okay, we're building the foundation with all these testimonies and all this background, but then there was never, like, I was waiting for that call to action. I was waiting for that. This was then. Now let's see if things have changed, which it hasn't. It hasn't changed. We all know it hasn't changed, but I was waiting for it to be like, okay, this is now, and this is what the fight looks like now. and it just never got to that point. It was just, let's all talk about Exodus from the beginning of Exodus to the end of Exodus, and then the documentary was over, and I felt like I was just waiting for more. And yeah, I agree. It did feel like a build up for a mini series, and that we just didn't get the next part.
Yeah, and I feel like you captured it correctly. Like when I read the synopsis for this movie, I thought that it was going to be about kind of like the movement that Exodus inspired, versus it feels more like the history of this organization that kind of realized that maybe they weren't right all along. And so you kind of see how that bubble slowly starts to like wind down and blow up in their face. Whereas, you do see, like, because it does show like clips throughout the movie of like how big in the 80s and 90s and how controversial these individuals were, and you got to see the impact, but they never kind of really expanded upon that. Like the impact of the culture felt like a footnote in the remainder of the film.
Sure, and it did really keep just on Exodus. I mean, the documentary opens up with a definition of conversion therapy, but people that have heard conversion therapy over the years can associate that with a lot of techniques that's been going on for decades. Everything from this, which is technically a form of like ex-gay ministry, but then shock therapy, even lobotomies, depending on what decade this was in. And I didn't expect them to go like through the history of conversion therapies, but this just felt really just like a closed story on just Exodus. And that's fine if that was the point. And obviously with the testimonies that they got and some of the leadership that fell out from Exodus, it was really interesting, especially since I recognized some of these people to be pretty prominent, especially in the 90s. But again, it just felt like this was all groundwork for something that never came. And if I had attended just like a seminar on Exodus and it was just a panel of survivors, this is what I would expect, and it would be really interesting. But I guess I was just expecting something else from a documentary, or some reflection on today, some call to action, something more than this. And especially if Ryan Murphy's behind it, I love a lot of his productions, especially like The Politician is a recent production of his that I just admire so much, and he's clearly an ally. And I was just waiting for this next step, or this part 2 to this that never came. So it was interesting, but it just wasn't. It felt like half a documentary or half a feature to me.
And Ryan Murphy's is again is super, like when you look at his body of work. I grew up, and one of my favorite shows to this day remains to be Nip Tuck, which is one of his earliest productions, if not his first like television series. And you look at other series that he's produced, American Horror Story and Hollywood for Netflix, and Halston more recently. And you can kind of see like he's not afraid to really push those boundaries when it comes to this. And this just kind of feels like this subject matter with safety gloves on.
Yeah, like they just, I mean, like it's obviously very relevant, and it's obviously very important, but it was just like, I don't know, it felt like a great concept, a great starting block, but then we never left the starting block. We had all the right voices, or we had good voices, and there was even some times when they were showing both sides, which was interesting. And the people that they got for this, their journeys were very interesting, especially since some of them, without spoiling it, were very much in the limelight, very much the people that they put in front of the crowds and in front of the television screens to really prop this ministry up. And again, I'm not saying it was boring. I'm just saying it felt like part 1. It didn't feel like there was an ending. Like when the credits hit, I was like, well, that's, it's done, like, where's, is that, is I was waiting for like like the Marvel, these characters will return for part two. And that never happened at the end of the credits. So I just felt like if they were going to go through this much, work, which they clearly put work in, where was the, what was the next step? It just felt like they weren't directing you to a next step. They were just kind of informing you of something that happened with no resolve or no call to action.
Yeah, it like not to say that this movie is this documentary is bad by any means. It's truly a well put together documentary, but it just feels very isolated. Especially when you understand like how many families this affected. Because I think that at the end they gave like it was bookended by statistics, and the ending I want to say was like 700,000 people have gone through conversion therapy. So you're showing a very very microscopic glimpse at what this movement that Exodus initially was a pioneer of started, but never really kind of got into the nitty gritty of like copycats and like how other ministries were like inspired by it, or like how people say, and you do get glimpses of that because it does open up on a transgender man who's turned his life to Jesus, and he like goes out to like grocery stores and like prays with people. And so it was cool to see that aspect of it, and you got to see, like you said, like both sides of it. But it 9 times out of 10 it just felt like it was so isolated, and it showed you such a tiny corner of the conversion therapy ideology.
Yeah, I mean, it just, conversion therapy is such a very broad, very big topic. And when they open up the black screen white text definition of conversion therapy, I'm like, okay, they're gonna tackle this. And I agree, just like you said, it was very isolated. Like, if this was part of a conversion therapy documentary series, and this episode was based on Exodus, and then the next episode was based on this, and the next episode was based on this, I would say this is a compelling chapter of this series. But when I realized that they should have just called it, I mean, they don't call it conversion therapy, the documentary, they call it pray away, which is definitely, suggesting this is going to cover the ministry side of things. But I mean, it definitely felt like they opened with, we're tackling this broad topic, and then they shrunk it down, and then they never broadened it back up. And yeah, I did feel like, okay, wow, this is interesting. Where are you going with this? And then when it didn't go anywhere, not to say that their stories aren't compelling, because they are. I just wanted more of now, who they are now, what they're doing now, even if that was another 20 minutes or 15 minutes of their life now, their fight now, how you can join their fight. I just felt like that was missing, like they didn't have time to film that because they spent all the time on the history of Exodus.
Yeah.
And I missed it.
Yeah. All right. So we're going to put this through our Rorschach rating scale, 0 to 5, halves being allowed. Where would this land for you?
I mean, it's a hard scale. That's easy with fiction movies. Documentary, sure. It's a little hard, especially when it's a compelling topic like this. I would give it 3 out of 5 stars. Again, I was very intrigued by their stories. I recognized some of the people there, and I was thankful to hear their voice, especially in this context. So I wouldn't say it's terrible. I wouldn't say it's terrible at all. I just felt like it was lacking. I felt that it was lacking.
I'm also going to go 3 out of 5. Again, like you said, I just want to kind of repeat what you had said. Like, I think we're on the same page. Like, it's still a very compelling documentary. There's still a lot of great information that Murphy and Blum bring to the table as far as the documentary goes, because from someone that didn't like grow up in Exodus and kind of was really ignorant to it. Like, this opened my eyes to a lot of it. But again, especially when you open and close with what conversion therapy is and the statistics that of how large it is, this feels like such a minuscule, like, snowflake of what we could have gotten and in its comparison. So it feels like we've been saying, it's such a tease.
Well, and even if, I mean, this documentary was clearly to tackle the ministry side of things, and you know, the ministry side of things is no small thing. But just because Exodus itself is no longer around doesn't mean there's not spin-off, you know, groups. Doesn't mean there's not the current thing. And that's what I was waiting for. If your documentary is about the ministry side of conversion therapy, you know, open people's eyes to what's going on now. You know, I just felt like that was missing, because you gave us great info on the history of Exodus, but then you just left it there. And, you know, you never said that it was done, but I just wanted to, okay, let's dive deep into what is Exodus today? You know, what's the ministry doing today? Because I feel like that's just as relevant a topic.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with you guys. So Pray Away is making the circuit rounds right now. It's going to be on Netflix this August. We're going to be doing a spoiler-filled episode when it drops. But Josh, where can people find you and more information about Nerf Herders Assemble?
You can find me on Facebook. Yeah, Nerf Herders Assemble. I also write movie reviews for Victims and Villains, so you can find me on there. I'm out there if you're looking.
He's so modest and so humble. He also writes fantasy books as well. And you guys can find me at Instagram and Letterboxd at Captain Nostalgia, and you guys can find us at victimsandvillains.net, where you guys can get access to all of our social media, including Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, wherever you guys get podcasts from, our Patreon, and movie reviews, like Josh said, past episodes like this one, and most importantly, our mental health resource library. So until next time, keep drinking the coffee, y'all. If you or someone you know is listening to this podcast right now and you're struggling with suicide, addiction, self-harm, or depression, we encourage you guys to please reach out. This is the heartbeat of why we do what we do. Suicide is currently the 10th leading cause of death in the United States, and as of this recording, there are 132 suicides that take place each and every day on American soil. And when you scale back internationally, there are 800,000 successful suicides. That is one death roughly every 40 seconds. So if you or someone you know is struggling, you guys can go to victimsandvillains.net/hope. That resource is going to be right in the description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this. There you'll find resources that include the National Suicide Lifeline, which is 1-800-273-8255. You can also text HELP to 741-741. We also have a plethora of other resources, including churches, getting connected with counselors, LGBT resources like the Trevor Project, and also veteran hotline as well. Please, if you hear nothing else in the show, understand that you listening to this right now, have value and worth. We get it. Suicide, depression, mental health, these are hard topics, and the stigma around them doesn't make it any easier. But please consider the resources right in the descriptions below, wherever you guys are listening, because once again, you have value and you have worth. So please stay with us.